Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin with a question. Who do you turn to when life gets heavy? When the bills are piling up, when the doors keep shutting, when people you trust to walk away, who do you turn to? Some of us turn to friends. Some of us lean on family. Some of us try to carry it all alone. But I came here today to remind you of one simple truth. God is your source. We live in a world that teaches us to depend on people, on money, on status. But people can disappoint you. Money can run out. Status can fade. Yet God, He never leaves. He never runs dry. He never fails. Imagine this. You're thirsty. You're searching for water. You keep running to broken cups, asking them to fill you. But broken cups can't hold water. The only way to be satisfied is to go directly to the fountain. And God is that fountain. I remember meeting a man who lost his job after 20 years. He said, "I thought my company was my security, but losing that job taught me something. My job was just a channel. God was the source." That hit me, because how many times do we confuse the channel with the source? Your employer is not your source. Your bank account is not your source. Even the people who support you, your friends, your spouse, they are channels. But God is the ultimate provider behind it all. Now, let me ask you, have you ever faced a moment when you didn't know how you make it? And somehow, in ways you couldn't explain, provision showed up? That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's the hand of God. When you understand that God is your source, you stop panicking over closed doors. Because if He closed one, He can open another. If one stream dries up, He can make a new one flow. And if the world says no, God still has the power to say yes. But here's the challenge. Sometimes we treat God like a last resort. We try everything else first. We push and pull. We hustle until we burn out. And only when nothing works, we finally whisper, "God, help me." What if, instead of making Him the last call, we made Him the first? What if we woke up each morning knowing, my strength, my wisdom, my opportunities, my very breath, all come from Him. Friends, this is freedom. When God is your source, you don't chase approval. When God is your source, you don't live in fear of losing things. Because you know, even if you lose something, you haven't lost everything. Your source is still alive. Your source is still strong. Your source is still God. So today I challenge you. Stop bowing to fear. Stop clinging to people who cannot carry you. Stop doubting your future because of one setback. Lift your eyes higher. Trust the source that never runs dry. Depend on the one who already knows your needs before you even speak them. Here are some key points related to this. People, jobs, and money are channels, not the ultimate source. God is a fountain that never runs dry. Closed doors are not the end. God can open new ones. Depending on God first brings peace and freedom. Trusting God removes fear of loss or rejection. With God as your source, you will always have enough. You know, one of the greatest mistakes we make in life is confusing the channel with the source. We often look at the people around us, the boss who signs our paycheck, the friend who helps us in hard times, the family member who shows up when we're in need, and we think, this is where my help comes from. And for a while it feels true. We get comfortable, we build expectations, we lean harder and harder on those channels, until one day, something shifts. The boss lets us go. The friend stops answering calls. The family member has their own struggles to carry. Suddenly, the flow that once felt so secure is gone, and we're left asking, what do I do now? I met a woman once who had been working at the same company for 15 years. Every morning, she woke up, clocked in, and told herself, as long as I have this job, I'll be fine. She built her whole life around that paycheck. Her house, her children's education, her sense of stability. But then the unexpected happened. The company downsized. And in a matter of minutes, the channel she trusted closed. I'll never forget what she said. It felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. Everything I depended on vanished. For weeks, she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't imagine what life would look like. And yet, slowly, something beautiful began to happen. Opportunities she had never considered started coming her way. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years reached out with support. A new job, better than the old one. opened up in a field she never thought she'd step into. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, I realized that the job was never my provider. God was. The job was just a channel. How many times have we all been in that place? Think about it. Maybe you depended on a relationship, someone you thought would never leave. You believed they were the reason for your happiness, your security, your hope. And when they walked away, your whole world collapsed. It's painful, isn't it? Because when we attach our sense of worth and safety to people, we're building our house on sand. And when the storm comes, the foundation can't hold. But God, He is the rock beneath it all. People may be the carriers, but God is the source. It's like electricity. When you turn on a lamp in your house, you might thank the lamp for giving you light. But the lamp isn't the source. The power plant is. The lamp is just a channel. Unplug the lamp, and it has no power on its own. That's the mistake we make with people. We look at them as if they are the electricity itself, when in truth, they are just plugged into the greater power. And when one lamp goes out, it doesn't mean the power is gone. It simply means God has another lamp waiting to shine in your life. A man once told me about his journey through financial struggle. He said, I thought money was my source. I worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, chasing every dollar, believing that if I could just earn enough, I'd finally feel safe. But no matter how much he earned, the fear never left. The bills always grew. The stress kept him awake at night. And then one day, an illness struck. He couldn't work the long hours anymore. He thought he'd lose everything. But in that season, he discovered something deeper. Friends brought groceries without him asking. A stranger covered part of his medical bills. He was given rest, peace, and healing in a way no paycheck could ever provide. He told me, that's when I realized money was just a tool. It wasn't my source. God had been sustaining me all along. Isn't it funny how we cling to the channels as if they are permanent? Yet channels can dry up. Companies close. People change. Bank accounts rise and fall. But when you understand that God is the source, you begin to see loss differently. A closed door isn't the end of the story. It's simply God redirecting the flow. Just like a river that changes course, the water still comes, even if it doesn't come the way you expected. I want you to picture a tree. Its branches stretch outward, full of leaves, reaching for the sky. Imagine someone cutting off one branch. The branch may wither, but does the tree die? No, because the roots are still alive. The roots are the source. That's how it is with God. People may leave. Opportunities may end. But the root system of your life, the source that keeps you standing, is unshakable when it's rooted in Him. Think about the story of Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. Every channel in his life seemed broken. His family abandoned him. His freedom was taken. His reputation was crushed. But through it all, God was still his source. And in the end, Joseph rose to become a leader of a nation, saving thousands from famine. The channels looked broken, but the source was still flowing. So, let me ask you this. Who are you depending on today? Are you placing your faith in a paycheck, in a person, in a position? Or are you rooted in the one who never changes? Because if your hope is in the channel, you will always live in fear of losing it. But if your hope is in the source, you can lose everything else and still stand tall. I remember once being at a grocery store with almost nothing left in my bank account. I was embarrassed, standing in line, knowing I didn't have enough for what I needed. But then something unexpected happened. The person had me turn around and said, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm supposed to cover this for you today. I was speechless. It wasn't about the money. It was about the reminder that God could use anyone, in any moment, to provide. That day, I walked out with more than groceries. I walked out with faith. That's what happens when you realize God is your source. You stop looking at people with desperation. You stop panicking over jobs and money. You stop believing that the channel is all you have. Instead, you look higher. You understand that every blessing, every open door, every bit of help has always come from Him. And even if one channel dries up, He has countless others you haven't even imagined yet. Have you ever been truly thirsty? I don't mean the kind of thirst you fix with a quick sip of water. I mean the kind of thirst that dries out your throat, cracks your lips, and makes you desperate for even a drop. That's the kind of thirst life gives us sometimes. The thirst for peace, the thirst for love, the thirst for purpose. And when that thirst comes, we often run to whatever seems closest. We drink from wells that promise satisfaction, but leave us emptier than before. We drink from the well of approval, hoping that if people like us enough, we'll finally feel whole. We drink from the well of success, thinking that if we climb high enough, we'll finally be at rest. We drink from the well of possessions, telling ourselves that if we buy one more thing, it will fill the ache inside. But each of those wells eventually runs dry. The applause fades. The success feels hollow. The possessions lose their shine. And once again, we're left thirsty. I once spoke to a young man who had built his entire identity on achievements. Top of his class, captain of his team, admired by everyone around him. On the outside, he looked like he had it all together. But late at night, when the noise stopped, he felt empty. He confessed, "It's like drinking salt water. No matter how much I achieve, I'm still thirsty." His words cut deep, because isn't that what so many of us experience? We keep drinking from cups that were never meant to satisfy us, and we wonder why we're still running dry. But here's the truth. There's a fountain that never runs out, a source of living water that doesn't depend on circumstances, achievements, or the approval of others. That fountain is God, and when you drink from him, you don't just get a sip, you get a flow that keeps on flowing. It's not temporary relief. It's a well that springs up inside of you, refreshing your soul again and again. Think about this. In the desert, water is life. Entire communities are built around wells and springs because without them, people can't survive. Now imagine being lost in a desert with no map, no direction, your throat burning with thirst. Then suddenly, you stumble upon an endless fountain. Clear water pouring out, more than enough for you and everyone you could ever bring to it. That's what God is like. In the desert seasons of our lives, when everything feels barren, he is a fountain that doesn't just give barely enough to survive. He gives abundantly, overflowing more than you imagined. I once heard a story of a woman who had been searching for love in all the wrong places. Relationship after relationship, heartbreak after heartbreak. Always chasing someone who would finally make her feel complete. One day she said, "I realized I was asking broken people to heal my brokenness." That hit me, because isn't that what we do? We expect limited things to give us unlimited fulfillment. But when she turned to God, when she stopped chasing people and started drinking from his love, she said, "For the first time in my life, I wasn't thirsty anymore. I wasn't desperate for someone to complete me. I felt whole." That's the fountain. That's the never-ending source. When you drink from God's fountain, you stop living in constant hunger for more of what this world offers. It doesn't mean you stop dreaming or working hard, but it means your identity and peace aren't tied to those things. Success can come and success can go, but your peace remains. People can applaud or they can criticize, but your worth remains untouched. The fountain keeps flowing, no matter what's happening on the outside. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a man who had lost nearly everything during a financial crisis. His business collapsed. His house was repossessed. On paper, he had nothing left. Yet when I spoke with him, he had a strange calm about him. He smiled and said, "I may have lost the streams, but I haven't lost the source. God has carried me through, and I know he'll do it again." That calm, that unshakable peace, it didn't come from circumstances. It came from drinking from a fountain that circumstances couldn't touch. There's a passage in Scripture where God says, "My peace I give you, not as the world gives." That's the difference. The world gives peace with conditions. If everything goes right, if people approve, if the bank account is full, then you can feel calm. But God gives peace without conditions. A fountain that flows even in the darkest nights, even in the fiercest storms. Let me paint another picture. Imagine standing beside a mountain spring. The water is rushing, clean, unstoppable. You can cup your hands and drink, and no matter how much you take, the flow doesn't slow down. Now, compare that to a bottle of water. Once it's empty, that's it. The world offers bottles. They run out. God offers springs. They never stop. So why do we keep have you ever stood in front of a closed door and felt like it was the end of everything? Maybe it was a job you thought would last forever, but suddenly ended. Maybe it was a relationship you poured your heart into that came to a painful close. Maybe it was a dream that seemed so real, so possible, only to collapse in front of you. Closed doors can feel final. They sound like silence after knocking again and again with no response. They feel like rejection, like failure, like God has forgotten you. But what if the closed door isn't the end? What if it's just the beginning of a new path you can't see yet? I once spoke with a man who had given years of his life to building his career. He thought he was secure. His performance reviews were excellent. His colleagues respected him, and his plans were set for the future. But one morning, he was called into the office and told, without warning, that his position had been eliminated. In an instant, the door slammed shut. He went home with a box of belongings, his identity wrapped up in that job stripped away. For weeks, he felt like a failure. He said to me, "I thought my future ended the moment that door closed." But here's the twist. Months later, he found an opportunity in an entirely different field, something he never would have considered if he hadn't been forced out. That new path gave him more joy, more freedom, and even more provision than the job he thought he lost forever. Looking back, he realized the closed door was not a punishment. It was a redirection. It makes me think of how sometimes we treat closed doors like they're locked forever, when in reality, God is guiding us to knock on another one. Imagine walking down a hallway. You open one door, and it leads to a room full of shadows. You keep trying to stay inside because it feels familiar, but the light doesn't live there anymore. Then the door shuts, and you panic. You bang on it. You beg for it to open again. You cry outside of it. But while you're fixated on that door, you miss the sound of another one opening just a few steps away. That's how God works. He sees the doors you can't see. He knows which ones will bring life and which ones will trap you. And sometimes His mercy looks like a closed door, even when it hurts. I think of relationships. A young woman once told me her story of heartbreak. She was engaged, planning a wedding, dreaming of forever. And then, out of nowhere, her fiancé ended it. She felt shattered. She said, "It was like watching the future I built in my mind collapse in slow motion." For a long time, she couldn't understand why God allowed that door to close. But years later, she looked back, standing beside the husband who truly valued her, living a life she never could have imagined at that time. She said, "If God had let me walk through that door, I would have settled for something less than what He had planned." Sometimes a closed door is the greatest act of protection we will ever experience. Think about Joseph in the Bible, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, thrown into prison. Every step of his life looked like doors slamming shut. Family closed their hearts to him. Freedom was taken from him. Reputation destroyed. If he had judged his life by those closed doors, he would have said, "It's over." But each closed door was leading him closer to the palace, closer to his purpose, closer to the position where he would save countless lives. If one door had stayed open, the comfort of his father's house, the approval of his brothers, the life he thought he wanted, he never would have reached the place God destined for him. Closed doors can look like endings, but in reality, they are chapters in a much bigger story. I once heard a man say, "When God closes a door, stop trying to break it down. It's locked for a reason." That stuck with me, because haven't we all tried to force doors open? Haven't we all begged for things that weren't meant for us? We cry out, "Why won't this work? Why won't they stay? Why can't this opportunity be mine?" And God, in His wisdom, says, "Because I have something better. You just can't see it yet." Closed doors test our trust. They ask us, do you believe God is still working, even when you don't understand? Picture a child tugging on a parent's hand, begging to run into a street, because they see something shiny on the ground. To the child, the closed hand of the parent feels unfair, cruel even. But the parent sees what the child cannot see, the danger beyond. In the same way, God sometimes pulls us back from doors that would have harmed us. And in the moment, it feels like rejection. But later, when the new door opens, when the safer, better path unfolds, we finally understand. A woman once told me about losing her dream scholarship. She had worked tirelessly for years, perfecting her grades, sacrificing her social life, everything for that one chance. And then the letter arrived, rejected. She was crushed. She said, it felt like the world ended. But months later, another opportunity came, an internship overseas that led to a career she had never imagined. She told me, if I had gotten what I wanted, I would have missed the life I was truly meant for. What if the no you're facing right now is actually a bigger yes waiting down the road? Closed doors teach us to stop anchoring our hope in circumstances and start anchoring it in God's character. If He is good, then the closed door must serve a purpose. If He is faithful, then the closed door must be leading to a better way. It doesn't mean the pain isn't real. It doesn't mean the loss doesn't hurt. It simply means the story isn't finished yet. So the next time you find yourself staring at a closed door, remember this. Doors are not the source. God is the source. And as long as God is writing your story, a closed door can never be the end. It can only ever be a turning point, a setup for what's next, a redirection towards something greater than you ever imagined. There's a certain kind of peace that comes only when you stop trying to control everything and finally trust the one who holds it all. You probably felt the opposite more times than you'd like to admit. The restless nights, the mind racing through every possible outcome, the heart pounding because of what might go wrong tomorrow. We live in a world that teaches us to hustle, to grind, to push harder, to depend on ourselves first and ask for help later. And yet, the harder we try to carry everything on our own, the heavier it feels. The truth is, when you depend on yourself alone, the weight eventually crushes you. But when you learn to depend on God first, something shifts. The same world that once felt suffocating suddenly feels lighter. The same problems that once consumed you don't seem as threatening anymore. There's a freedom in knowing you don't have to be the savior of your own story. I once spoke with a woman who was always anxious, always tired, always afraid of failing. She had built her whole life around being strong enough, smart enough, capable enough to handle everything herself. When things went wrong, she would double her efforts, working longer hours, pushing her body past exhaustion, never asking anyone for help. She admitted to me, I thought if I could just manage everything perfectly, I'd finally be at peace. But instead, the more she tried to control, the more her life spun out of control. The peace she was chasing kept slipping through her fingers. And then one day, after hitting rock bottom, she whispered a prayer she hadn't said in years. God, I can't do this anymore. I need you. That simple surrender changed everything. She told me later, the problems didn't disappear overnight, but for the first time, I felt free. I wasn't carrying them alone. That's the difference depending on God first makes. It doesn't erase the storm, but it anchors you so the storm doesn't destroy you. We often live like someone trying to swim across the ocean while dragging a heavy suitcase. Imagine the exhaustion, the panic of trying not to sink, the fear of drowning. That suitcase is our attempt to control everything on our own, our plans, our fears, our worries. And then God says, let it go. Trust me to carry you. The moment you release it, the water that once threatened to pull you under suddenly holds you up. You realize you were never meant to swim that ocean alone. Depending on God first is like floating instead of fighting. The waves may still come, but you don't drown because you're not relying on your own strength anymore. I remember meeting a man who had lost almost everything he valued. His business failed, his marriage ended, and his health was deteriorating. He said to me, I was at the end of myself. Nothing I did was working. In that moment of brokenness, he made a choice to stop striving and start trusting. Every morning, instead of jumping straight into worry, he began with prayer. Every decision, instead of panicking, he paused and asked for God's guidance. Over time, his circumstances began to change, yes, but more importantly, his heart changed. He said, the peace came before the breakthrough. The freedom came before the answer. That's the power of depending on God first. It frees you from needing everything to be perfect before you can breathe again. There's a story I once heard about a tightrope walker who crossed between two skyscrapers. He carried people across on his back, one at a time. When he asked for volunteers, the crowd cheered but hesitated. Everyone believed he could do it, but few trusted him enough to climb on his back. That's how it is with us and God. We say we believe. We say he's able. But depending on him first means stepping onto his back, letting him carry us across the heights where we cannot survive on our own. And when you do, you discover a peace you can't explain, because you're no longer the one keeping yourself from falling. I knew a young man who was always terrified of the future. He would say, "What if I fail? What if I never succeed? What if I end up with nothing?" Those questions haunted him until one day someone asked him, "What if God provides? What if God leads you? What if you actually don't have to figure it all out alone?" That flipped everything. He started handing over each fear to God, one by one. And slowly, the weight lifted. His circumstances didn't suddenly turn perfect, but he was no longer a prisoner of anxiety. That's the freedom of dependence. It releases you from the prison of what-ifs. Depending on God first also changes the way you see success. The world tells us freedom is doing whatever we want, whenever we want. But in reality, that often leads to chains of debt, chains of stress, chains of emptiness. God's way of freedom is different. It's not about chasing everything. It's about trusting him to guide you to the right things. When you let him lead, you don't have to run in circles anymore. You don't have to prove yourself endlessly. You can breathe. You can rest. You can live knowing you're right where you need to be, not because you forced it, but because he placed you there. I once sat with a friend who had just received devastating medical news. She told me, "I don't know what the future holds, but I feel strangely calm." When I asked her why, she said, "Because I know who holds me." That's the essence of it. Depending on God first doesn't mean you won't face pain. It means you can face it without fear, because your life is anchored in something greater than the storm. And maybe that's the question we all have to ask ourselves. What are we depending on? Are we leaning on money, on people, on our own abilities? Or are we leaning on God first? Because if it's anything else, one of the deepest fears that lives inside the human heart is a fear of losing what we love or being rejected by those we need. We hold on to relationships, jobs, possessions, even our own image, with a tight grip because somewhere inside we're terrified of what will happen if they slip through our hands. That fear shapes so much of how we live. It makes us compromise who we are just to be accepted. It makes us cling to things that are already gone. It makes us wake up in the middle of the night with our chest heavy and our mind racing, asking, what if I lose it all? What if I'm not enough? What if they walk away? But there's a different way to live, and it begins when you put your trust in God above everything else. Because when your security is rooted in Him, there's a quiet kind of fear that so many of us carry, and it whispers the same question again and again. What if I don't have enough? Enough money to pay the bills. Enough strength to make it through another day. Enough love to fill the loneliness. Enough hope to keep going. That fear of scarcity lives inside almost every heart, and it shows up in subtle ways. It makes us anxious when we open the mailbox, afraid of what the letters might demand. It makes us overwork, saying yes to things that drain us because deep down we're scared to run out. It makes us cling to relationships even when they're broken, because we're terrified of ending up alone. But something changes when you truly understand that God is your source. The fear of scarcity begins to fade, because you realize you don't live at the mercy of what you see. You live under the care of the one who owns it all. With God as your source, you will always have enough. I once met a single mother who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She worked long hours at a job that barely paid the rent, came home exhausted, and still tried to give her children as much love as she could. She told me about nights where she would secretly skip dinner so her kids could eat. On the surface, it looked impossible. The numbers didn't add up. But she said something I'll never forget. Every time I thought I wouldn't make it, something showed up. A neighbor left groceries at the door. A bill was mysteriously covered. A bonus arrived at work just when I needed it most. I realized it wasn't luck. It was God. Somehow, there was always enough. She had discovered a truth many of us miss. That when God is your source, provision is not dependent on what you can see or control. Sometimes enough doesn't look like abundance in the way we imagine. Sometimes enough is just the strength to take the next step. I once spoke with a man battling a long illness. He didn't know how he was going to make it through another week of treatments, and he confessed, "I don't feel strong enough." But as he told his story, his eyes softened. He said, "But every morning I wake up, there's a fresh strength waiting for me. Not more than I need, not less than I need, just enough for today." That reminded me of the story of manna in the wilderness. The Israelites were fed every day with just enough bread for that day. Not for tomorrow, not for next week, but enough for today. And in that daily dependence, they learned to trust the source more than the supply. I think we often measure our security by how much we can store up, how much we can control, how much we can keep. But God teaches us something different. He teaches us that true security comes not from the size of our storage, but from the faithfulness of the one providing. I knew a couple once who lost their home in a fire. Everything was gone: the furniture, the pictures, clothes. They stood in front of the ashes with nothing left but each other. You would think they would have been crushed, but instead, the husband told me, "We lost a house, but we didn't lose the one who gave us the house. He'll help us rebuild. And as long as we have him, we'll always have enough." That's a perspective that only comes from knowing your true source. There's a freedom that comes when you stop obsessing over whether you'll run out. Scarcity keeps you chained. It makes you hoard. It makes you afraid to give, afraid to take risks, afraid to dream. But when you know God is your source, you realize you cannot outgive him. You cannot outneed him. You cannot outrun his provision. I've seen people with very little live with such generosity because they've discovered that generosity doesn't drain you when God is your fountain. It multiplies. A woman once told me, "Every time I gave when I didn't think I could somehow, I received more back than I started with." That's not coincidence. That's the economy of heaven. And it's not just about money. Enough means peace in the middle of chaos. Enough means wisdom when you don't know what decision to make. Enough means love that fills the emptiness left by others who walked away. I've sat with people who lost loved ones and thought they could never go on, only to watch them rise each morning with a quiet strength they couldn't explain. That's God giving enough. Not removing the pain, but carrying them through it. It's like standing in a desert, staring at dry sand stretching endlessly. You think, "There's no way I can survive here." But then you see a stream of water flowing out of a rock. Impossible, unexpected, yet real. That's what God does. He makes streams in the desert. He makes ways where there are none. He doesn't promise you'll always have excess, but he promises you'll never be forsaken. He doesn't promise you'll never face need, but he promises that in need, he will be your enough. I remember one man telling me that he used to live in constant fear of losing his wealth. Every decision he made was haunted by the possibility of loss. He said, "It didn't matter how much I had. It never felt like enough." But after a financial collapse where he lost almost everything, he came to know God in a way he never had before. And with tears in his eyes, he said, "I finally learned that enough is not a number in my bank account. Enough is knowing I'm not alone, that God is with me." That kind of enough is unshakable, because no economy, no job, no rejection, no storm can take it away. When God is your source, enough is not just survival. It's sufficiency with peace. Enough means you can stop running, stop chasing, stop living in fear of losing what you have. Enough means you can breathe. Enough means you can trust that even tomorrow, even in uncertainty, even when everything around you shifts, he will still be there, pouring out just what you need. Right when you need it. Let me ask you, what are you afraid of running out of? Money? Strength? Love? Hope? Whatever it is, I want you to remember this truth. God is your source, not your job, not the economy, not the people who come and go. God alone. When you live in fear, you live small. But when you live knowing God is your source, you live free. You give more. You risk more. You dream bigger. Because you know that no matter what happens, you will always have enough. Enough for today. Enough for tomorrow. Enough to keep moving forward. So stop holding back. Stop shrinking. Stop doubting. Step into the life God has been calling you to. Trust him with everything. Trust him with what feels impossible. Trust him with your future. Because when God is your source, you will never run dry. When God is your source, you will never be forsaken. When God is your source, you will always, always, always have enough. And that's the kind of truth that can change the way you live. Not someday, but right now. So the next time fear whispers, what if I don't have enough? You answer with this. So the next time fear whispers, what if I don't have enough? You answer with this. I already do, because God is my source. In a world filled with uncertainty, fear, and endless chasing after security, it's easy to forget one eternal truth. God is your ultimate source. Your support means everything. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe.